Chapter 29. At the Marketplace. May 2007. Another convoy. This time, the danger of being shot had escalated threefold. Just as Annalise started to climb into the Humvee, a sergeant gripped her shoulder. "You're the gunner for this trip." Her body went limp as fear filled her chest. Nobody asked if she wanted to do this. It was not an option. She could not back down. Instead, she gulped hard as she climbed into the Humvee and sat down on the swing-like harness. It took her up into the turret where she could man the .50 caliber heavy-duty weapon. Her head and parts of her chest were now exposed to the hostile outer world. She knew they'd chosen her because she was the only lower enlisted soldier in the vehicle. And one of them wasn't even a soldier but a civilian translator. She went into prayer mode and stayed there constantly, without ceasing. They entered the busy, much too populated urban streets, where people were milling about the marketplace. Annalise noticed a man push a chubby boy into the middle of the street directly in front of her Humvee. "What's that kid doing?" she yelled aloud to her friends over the loud hum of the vehicle. "Kid, get out of the way! Out of the way!" Her heart started beating at an impossible speed. "How do you say 'get away' in Arabic?" she asked the translator, who was sitting to the right of her dangling legs. When he gave her the Arabic phrase, Annalise attempted to yell out the words as she gestured at the boy with a shooing motion. The kid didn't budge, but he did look scared. Annalise gripped the .50 cal until her fingers turned white. Her trigger finger was in position as she shifted her stare toward the man in the street. The guy didn't look scared at all. This was being done on purpose. Now she could see that the boy wasn't chubby. Instead, he was wearing a bulky vest with wires poking out. The passenger in the Humvee used a bullhorn and yelled orders out in Arabic, but the boy didn't budge. He looked at the man and then back at the vehicle, slowly making its way towards him. "What do I do?" Annalise called down to the sergeant. But she already knew, and feared the answer. "Shoot him." The answer he gave her was an order, but it was laced with a sincere, apologetic tone. Nobody wanted to kill an innocent person. So young a child. The words stung in her ears and in her gut. She yelled harder than before to the child, trying to warn him that she would shoot him down. She yelled and sobbed. Her face contorted into a grimace as she placed her finger into position. Oh, God! Stark terror shot through her as she aimed for the boy's head and squeezed the trigger, cutting down the child as if he were a rag doll. "Forgive me, forgive me, forgive me." Bile rose up in her throat, and she had to use every ounce of determination she possessed to keep from vomiting. But what choice did she have? It was either him or her and her soldiers, not to mention the other Humvee behind hers. Hot tears streamed down her face. The boy's body was lying sprawled over the street. People on the street wailed, and every cry pierced Annalise's heart and mind. She had taken someone else's life. A child's life. There was no glory in this. It was an unnatural act. All of this for what? What did that man who shoved the boy into the streets gain from this fatal loss? She surveyed the area, looking for the man. He had vanished, of course. Had he been the boy's father? How could these people do these things to their own children? During the church service at the base, yesterday's ordeal played itself over and over in Annalise's head. She had not told Luke about it. She could not imagine ever saying such a thing. She felt deeply ashamed. Yes, this was war. There had been no alternative. But it still ate into her and scraped against everything she believed. She stepped out of the chapel service and made her way to a table where she could reread her notes from the sermon. A small breeze cooled the sweat beads that had formed on her forehead and neck. As she read, she wondered about God's protection. The Bible promised that He would never leave her, and yet a month ago, 3 Latvian soldiers were killed by a roadside bomb, 2 American soldiers 2 weeks before that, and the list went on. Who's to say that she wasn't next? She started highlighting and underlining text as she was trying to make sense of it all, but try as she might, her heart just wasn't in it. Annoyed with her recent attacks of doubt, and even a lack of faith, she decided to visit Selina at the hospital. She had hoped that Selina would not be too busy, and would be able to take a short break to get a soft drink and talk about something other than death for a change. But when she arrived at the hospital, she saw that Selina was preparing her station to receive a patient. "Thank goodness you're here," said Selina, as she reached for a box of latex gloves. "Helicopter coming in a few minutes, and we short-staffed." The soft drink would have to wait till later. Life is truly like an MRE. You never know what you are going to get. Annalise could already figure out what Selina might ask for. She would most likely be a litter bearer. "Whatever I can do to help," she offered, without yet hearing what the favor might be. "Please to grab the gator and bring patient here." She threw her keys, and without another word, she turned around and went back to preparing her station. As Annalise left the hospital, she heard the sound of the propellers cutting through the midday sky. She drove the gator, which looked a lot like a military-grade golf cart with a flatbed in the back, and arrived near the helipad just as the massive bird touched down. A flight medic jumped out, and with the help of another soldier, they began to unbuckle the various restraints that were used to keep the patient safe during air travel. There was a quickness about them. Something about this patient seemed critical. Knowing they would need her to hit the gas pedal and speed toward the EMT section of the hospital as soon as the litter patient was on the flatbed, she stayed in the driver's seat. As she looked back to get a better view of what was happening behind her, she saw that the soldier helping the flight medic was Luke, and he looked ghastly. Luke climbed the flatbed where the patient now lay, and continued to squeeze the ambu-bag in order to pump air in the soldier's lungs. The flight medic gave Annalise the hand signal to drive, and as she did, the tires kicked up all sorts of sand and pebbles. "Come on, buddy. Breathe! Breathe!" yelled Luke from behind. Annalise kept driving, though her curiosity was burning within her. She desperately wanted to know who the patient was. As she arrived, a wave of medical personnel were already at the threshold of the EMT entrance, awaiting their arrival. "GSW to the upper left chest!" screamed the flight medic to the doctor. She stopped the vehicle and jumped out to help take out the litter. Her arm brushed up against Luke's, but it did not deter him from his task at hand. "1, 2, 3, lift!" she said, as she and the flight medic picked up the litter to start making their way inside the hospital. Alas, she lay her eyes on the patient. It was Sergeant Barnes, the MP, Luke's best friend. His shirt was torn open and his chest was exposed. He had received a gunshot wound to the chest. It was far more gruesome than what she had imagined it would look like. "Stay with us, buddy," she murmured in his ear. Within a few short seconds, Barnes was laying in a gurney. She kissed her friend on the forehead and then walked away as he was engulfed by a team of medical personnel. "Please, God, don't take him," she pleaded, as she crumpled onto the floor outside the hospital, her face wet with tears. "Hey, soldier!" yelled a voice behind the helicopter. She looked up and saw the pilot waving her down. She got up from the floor and jogged toward him. "Hey, soldier, can you help me put the bodies in the morgue?" She couldn't imagine what could be more important than being by Barnes' side right now. Helping move already dead bodies felt so pointless at the moment. There were 2 black body bags, and she wondered if she knew these soldiers. But opening the bag would probably traumatize her. "Don't worry," he assured her. "They're not ours." She helped him carry the bodies to the morgue. Then they called the chaplain. Even as the minister prayed over the bodies, his slumped posture and resigned expression made it obvious that he was war-weary. Annalise wondered how many times this particular chaplain had prayed over the dead here in Iraq. What was the toll? Was it 20? Or was it over 100? No doubt this man of cloth had seen too much death and pain, and it had begun to show in his face and his voice. As Annalise lowered her head and closed her eyes in reverence, she didn't utter a prayer in silence. Instead, she wondered how the chaplain did it, and whether what he was doing was working for him. June 2007, 0200 hours. Annalise snuggled into her bed and prayed for some good sleep. Today had been a busy day, to say the least. She had been at Al-Qut for the last week investigating a foodborne outbreak, and then had to wait around for nearly 12 hours for a convoy that was heading back to Adiwaniyah. She finally got back to her trailer around midnight, aching for sleep. Her body was at the point of exhaustion, but even though she put in her earplugs and lay down, she still couldn't quiet her thoughts or shut down her mind. The image of the little boy she'd killed several weeks ago still haunted her whenever she was alone in bed. The image of Barnes being placed into a body bag after several units of blood and a team of doctors attempted to save his life still burned in her mind as well. She had walked in on Luke punching a wall as he screamed out in desolation. That night he cried hard as he grieved the loss of his good friend. All the guys in the group took it hard. It wasn't the same without Barnes there. No more jokes were heard around the table, just sighs and long faces. Everyone had an excuse to go back to work because laughing and joking felt sacrilegious. Staff Sergeant Petty seemed to be taking a lot harder than the other guys. He wasn't quite himself anymore. He was withdrawn and didn't hang out to play poker as much as usual. But everyone in the group figured he just needed his space. The pain would all blow over soon enough. This was war. It wasn't anyone's first time losing a friend. Petty, they thought, would get over it sooner or later. Annalise also dreamt about Luke. He was always on her mind. She dreamt about the life they would have soon. Only 2 more months of this, and they would be back in the States. They could finally get married and have the children they both longed for. Luke, the love of her life. These mellow thoughts soothed her emotions, and the world began to fade. Boom. Boom. The distant sound of mortar hitting the ground nudged into her mind, but she shoved it away and continued to dream about Luke. Just 2 more months. Boom. Boom. The sound came much closer, but again she dismissed it. The girl in the next room probably banged her elbow against the wall again. "Annalise, wake up! Get up! Open the door!" Luke! He was pounding at her door like he wanted to break it down. She woke up with a shudder, knowing instinctively that this was an attack, a bad one. The small hairs on the back of her neck stood up on end. Adrenaline and fear pumped through her veins as she instinctively reached for her flak vest, Kevlar, and M16. She rushed to the door with her gear and realized she was wearing nothing more than her PT shorts and a sports bra. "We gotta go, come on!" Luke was also in his PTs, but no Kevlar. Nothing to protect his body. Just carried his M16. "Okay, let me grab my shirt and shoes." "No! We're going now!" He grabbed her arm in an almost painful grip and pulled her outside. Outside, it was sheer madness. No matter how many drills Annalise had been through, nothing could prepare a person for a real attack. The basic human instinct for survival drove the soldiers to run for their lives. Overhead, a mortar whistled past them, hitting 40 feet back beside a few sleeping quarters, the shrapnel piercing through the wood as if it were butter. The mortar hit the ground in a thunderous roar, and she and Luke stopped for a millisecond, holding on to each other as they instinctively ducked. The post alarm finally went off. Its blaring sound only added to the mayhem. Annalise heard bursts of gunfire in the background, but she didn't know who was firing at whom. After the impact, she and Luke continued on their run to the nearest bunker, and the last 4 feet easily felt like 4 miles. Their feet couldn't move fast enough. Another whistling sound, this time too close for comfort. Luke pushed Annalise, and she fell hard to the ground, scraping her knees in the palms of her hands. He threw his body over hers, not a moment too soon. She felt the percussive shockwave of the mortar's impact, and then all went silent.